were sitting at a VRB boat, Mount Shasta, and I was thinking about California. I'm like, gosh, that last line of Hotel California, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And that's just how I really felt. So what got me through that last 7 days of California was rewriting all the lyrics to Hotel California. And you can go on our Instagram page if you want to see that, because I'm not singing it tonight.
Nikita, do you know how to remove this little Zoom thing?
It doesn't.
Oh, okay.
But you can minimize the.
I just don't.
Screens. No, the screens to your.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I think if you go to more. Yeah. And then hide floating panel.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that's helpful. All right. So, back on the trail.
Back on the trail, yeah, this is like the permitting process for us too, it took us a couple tries as well.
I'm going to be snooping by today. Okay, so, well, welcome to our night of telling stories from the Pacific Crest Trail, and I'm actually gonna move this over a little bit so we're not blocking the screen quite as much. We might have to move around a little bit, but so to start with, the Pacific Crest Trail, let's hope this plays. Again, I was gonna come try this all out beforehand, but okay, well, there was gonna be a really nice little video here. I don't know why this is great. Okay, also, I'm gonna have to actually turn the sound off on my computer for some of this stuff. I just realized I didn't realize I needed, so this is, okay. Okay, so great. Okay, this the Pacific Crest Trail. Just why don't we just talk? Okay, here we go. It's loading. It's loading.
There we go.
This is the problem that I don't want it. Okay, well. No, I don't want this either. Okay, well.
Yeah, let's just go.
It's not. Okay, we're just gonna look at this instead. Okay. There was a really cool video that showed all of this, that kind of did a nice little overview of all of the different places that you go, but Mike's just going to talk about it instead.
All right, so the PCT was conceived in the 1920s by a woman named Catherine Montgomery from Bellingham, Washington, actually. And then it started to get some promotion by the 1930s by a man from Pasadena, California, named Clinton C. Clark, who's known as the father of the Pacific Crest Trail. In the 1920s, they started to map what was known as the Oregon Skyline Trail through the Cascades. And they pretty much just extended the Oregon Skyline Trail to become the Pacific Crest Trail. So it was kind of in these sections, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. But it was finally completed in its entirety in 1994 in Acton, California. So actually about 400 miles in, you complete the PCT. So we were, in the desert there and we're like, should we be done? We hadn't even made it to the Sierras yet, so we decided to continue on. The whole thing was walking home. So the trail is 2,653 miles long. We had 484,422 feet of elevation gain, which is the equivalent of what?
It's like basically it's entering space and coming back down again in terms of elevation gain and loss.
So our legs are still ripped, right? We lost 483,000 feet of elevation. So we went through 23 national forests, 51 wilderness areas, and 7 national parks. So quite a bit. So like I said earlier, it's split into sections. You have the desert, you have Central California, Northern California, and then Oregon and Washington. The desert is 700 miles from Campo, which is on the Mexican border, to Kennedy Meadow South at the start of the Sierras. It is hot, exposed, full of desert chaparral, Joshua trees, hot days, cold nights. But then you get up into these sky islands, these mountain kind of islands, like the Laguna Mountains, the San Bernardino Mountains, the San Jacinto Mountains, where you get more into the subalpine, montane, mixed conifer forest. So after 700 miles and really getting your PCT feet, you get into Central California and the high Sierras. So here you get into the big granite, beautiful jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada. And you're in mixed conifer forest. You get glaciated lakes pretty much everywhere from the valley bottoms to cirques and tarns in the high country. It's at this point you get to the highest point on the trail at over 13,000 feet at Forester Pass. And there's also a side trail to Mount Whitney at 14,500 feet, which is the highest point in the contiguous United States, which I'd say about 90% of PCT hikers take that side trail.
People we met who didn't take it had already climbed it. It's the kind of thing you only do once unless you're Mike, and then you do it twice.
Yeah, maybe 3 times. We'll see. Yep. All right. After getting through the Sierras, you got your legs, you're pretty tired. We're heading through there in the early part of the season. So there's still snow, even last year when there was kind of low snow year. But then you get into Northern California, which is 626 miles from Kennedy Meadows North to Ashland, Oregon. And there you're kind of in rolling hills, mixed conifer forest. And lots of burn areas. So it can be hot and very exposed in that time. And then you get about 60 miles into Oregon, and Oregon officially begins in Ashland. And that's the flattest part of the PCT. So you're pretty much in just mixed conifer forest with those volcanoes sticking up like the Sisters, Mount Hood, Mount Jefferson, so on and so forth. And then finally, you cross the Columbia River at its low point on the trail at like 82 feet above sea level. And you have the 500 miles left of Washington from Cascade Locks to Manning Park, British Columbia. These are rugged mountains, high glacial, glaciated peaks with permanent snow fields, subalpine forest, Alaskan yellow cedar, mountain hemlock. And then in the lowlands, you get the classic, rainforest that we're familiar with here, and lots of huckleberries, which we were worried was going to delay us quite a bit.
It's also, I feel like this is one of those things that often we like brag about in the Pacific Northwest, which is how much vertical relief the Cascades have. And it is definitely true. It has more vertical relief in Washington than even like the JMT does in the Sierras. So when you're talking about like how much in a day you're going up and going down, it is the steepest section of the trail by far. In the Sierras, it's actually not that steep, really, because you don't go down very far.
No, you're up so high there. Yep.
All right, so let's see. Moving on, if it lets me. Okay, there we go. Why did we decide to hike the PCT? So this is.
I sit down a little bit.
Oh,
yeah.
Actually,
We can.
I drove over here.
Yeah. Here, no, Mike, you know what? I can undo this and then we can just do this.
Okay.
This will work. Okay. So why did we decide to hike the PCT? I grew up in here. And this is actually a photo of when I chaperoned a trip to the Olympic Peninsula, one of the 8th grade trips on Lopez when I was like 20. So he had me out pretty early on. I think I was 3 weeks old on my first camping trip. I will also say big credit to my mother as well. She got me out hiking and she worked really hard to make sure I didn't end up hating hiking by letting me turn around like 200 feet into a hike once because I was like just done. Didn't do that on this one. Maybe felt so anyway, I just grew up hiking. I don't even know when I became aware of the PCT, but it always was sort of like something I was interested in. And then when we moved to Montana, we sort of knew we were going to move back eventually. And at some point while we were in Montana, and Mike and I had talked about how we wanted to hike the trail. And actually our first date was on the PCT. He claims I asked him, I claim he asked me to a film festival. And then we ended up camping and hiking up at Hart's Pass the following day. So we kind of became interested early on. And then
So the PCT is quite foundational to our relationship. Yeah.
And so when I was in Montana, at some point, I just had this idea of like, when I moved back to Washington, I really wanted to hike home. And I really loved the idea of starting at the Mexican border and doing the Pacific Crest Trail and hiking into the place that I was choosing to live. And hope, just because this section gets a little bit rushed, I'll say this now, it was really beautiful that we did, even though the end of the trail might not have been exactly what we wanted, that piece of it very much was real and true for me. And I'm glad I got that goal, so.
Yeah, and I grew up in the upper Midwest where people don't really hike. They just like to watch the Packers and drink PBR. And I can still pull out that accent when I need to. So glad that's still there. But when I was in college, I started hiking. There were the bluffs along the Mississippi River. I took a trip to Moab, Utah, got lost in the desert for several hours, and that was great in a blizzard. And I just wanted to hike. So I knew I wanted to move out west pretty much as soon as I started hiking in college. So I moved to Big Bear, California. Got a job working in an environmental school and lived right on the PCT. Took my first steps on the PCT and really just thought, wow, that's a really cool idea. People actually, go from Mexico to Canada. So I didn't even know you could really backpack. I was into hiking and everything. So my senior year at college, actually, I was heading to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and picked up this backpacker magazine in Chicago's O'Hare Airport and read about backpacking for the first time. I'm like, I'm going to try that. So I loaded up all my stuff and all I had, all the outdoor gear I had, when I graduated college, and set out on the North Country Trail for an overnight, did everything completely wrong, but had a blast. And then after 1 year in Big Bear, I hiked the John Muir Trail here. This is a picture of me in a place called Grouse Meadows, which was a great day on the JMT. It was a terrible day on the PCT. So, but after doing the JMT, and I summited Mount Whitney at 8:22 in the morning on August 22nd on my 27th birthday. And that's when I'm like, okay, backpacking is going to be my life. And I knew that I wanted to through hike the PCT someday. And then after our first date on the PCT, I'm like, I found the right girl. So.
So then the final piece of this, which is more related to COVID and getting married, is at some point, I still love this part. I just think it's worth it. The real impetus for this became that we planned a wedding in 2020. And in March, we sort of realized this may not happen. And in April, we were sort of like, and at first we were like, oh, it's going to be fine. It's not till September. And then April rolls around and we're like, oh, maybe not. And so round about the end of April, beginning of May, when we sort of realized it wasn't going to happen, we realized that the budget for a wedding and the budget for the PCT are really similar. And we were like, well, and so we're hiking one day and I'm like, well, if we don't have the wedding, would you want to hike the PCT? And Mike goes, yeah. He's behind me. He sort of like just doesn't say anything. He's like, yeah. And about 5 minutes later, we're both like, we don't really want to have the wedding. We just want to hike the PCT, right?
So we're secretly like crossing our fingers that our wedding gets canceled and we get to hike the PCT.
We did get married. There was 25 people. It was at our house. It was super cheap and it was great. And we got to hike the PCT. So in October of 2021, we moved back to Washington and started the incredibly long process of, oh yeah, I have to do it this way, of planning the PCT, which is a lot of work. I'm not going to talk a lot about it tonight. If people have more questions about it, there will be time during question and answer. And there's also, this is the kind of stuff where either you're interested or you're not. So if you are very interested, come talk to us because we love talking about it. The big thing, I mean, I think what was interesting was there are permits for the PCT. They're free. They're not necessarily required. They're a lot, how to figure that out is actually a lot easier than we realized at the time. But we applied in November and we didn't get one. And it was actually kind of hard. It ended up leading to some really good conversations that I think meant that we approached the PCT and the whole hiking process in a much healthier way than we would have. But we ended up not getting a permit until January. And so after January, we sort of had to hit the ground running with every single one of these things. And we had to do it in like 2 months. I'm not really going to talk about budget stuff other than to say, inflation was insane this year and it was a lot more than we realized, but also, I mean, it was a trip of a lifetime and it was worth it.
Yeah, just a fun story about the planning too. Like a lot of you know, Emma is a really okay. Okay. A lot of you know Emma's a really good cook. If you wanna go to food.
Well,
I was Okay.
gonna talk about two things first.
Okay, I'll get back to that. Sorry. Losing my place.
And then the other two things, training wise, strength training is really important. There's really not much you can do though beforehand. Like the only way to train to hike 20 miles a day with a backpack on your back is to hike 20 miles a day with a backpack on your back. There are definitely things you can do to make that easier. And if that is something you're interested in, I have a lot of resources and you can talk to me about that or Mike. And then finally, logistics. I'm going to split this into two things. Some of these logistics you had to prep for, and then other things in a normal backpacking trip, you often know where you're going to camp, what you're doing, where you're going, what you're eating. This is 5 months. There is no way to know all of that. And so one of the big hurdles we had was jumping over not needing to know things. We had this whole mileage plan for the first week where we were going to ramp up our miles. And we threw that out on day 2 by hiking 5 additional miles. And that pretty much set the tone for the entire trail. It was really hard to meet up with family that way because sometimes we were like, we could show up there anytime within a 48-hour period and we're not going to be able to let you know because we don't have service. So that was pretty common. Huge shout out to a friend of ours, dad, Nelson Miller, who basically did the first 700 miles of resupplies for us. And he was incredibly flexible. And we would be like, we think we'll get there on this day. And we'd text him and be like, we're here a day early. And he's like, okay, I'll be there. So it took people like that. It was great. But basically, I think you can do a lot more work than you need to in this. I think most of this figures it out self on the trail. Now Mike gets to tell his fun story about food while I talk about the few things I do want to talk about. The big thing I want to say about food before Mike gets started is that basically people eat like crap on the trail. That is just general what happens. If I was going to spend 5 months out there, I was not going to do that. So it was really easy for me to make the decision quickly that we needed to make as much of our own food as we could. I have a dehydrator. I had access to the Lopez food share. I made a lot of stuff and it was great. I do not regret that at all. The one thing I'm going to add to that I think the one piece of advice I got that I loved was don't make any more than 10 of any one thing because you will get sick of it. The 3 things. Oh yeah, this is what our food looks like. Literally, this is just leftover food. This is a meal for 2 people. It's got freeze dried meat. I bought that in bulk. It's got dehydrated rice and then a dehydrated soup in it. That was a good one, actually. I'm kind of bummed we didn't get to eat it.
Feel free to take it if you want to try it.
We're not going to eat it now. Don't make more than 10 of any one thing because you will get sick of it. But no, the 3 things that we made more than 10 of are the 3 things we got sick of and never want to eat again. And now I can let Mike talk about it.
Yeah, so this is all Emma right here. I felt kind of bad because I just kind of would do the physical training stuff and she just went to town on this, but she had a really good system. So if there's 2 things that people know about Emma Ewert. She's a great cook and she loves the Olympics. Those are 2 things. So Nancy was actually traveling. So Emma sets up this whole just system in the kitchen and is going crazy. And this was last year during the Olympics. So she sets up our big TV that we just randomly bought in Montana because it was the cheapest TV we could find. It's about the size behind your head there, Mason. And she's got it just in the middle of the living room and just cooking, going to town about 8 hours a day, watching Jesse Diggins and just getting pumped up for, yeah. So Nancy gets home. I forgot where you were traveling, Nancy, but Nancy gets home and Emma's got her pack right here. And she's like, Mom, check out my pack. And she swings it on her back and knocks the TV over. And that was the end of the TV. But great timing because we didn't need it for 5 months. So.
All right. So gear. this is a presentation in itself, and I'm actually going to go even shorter than I've been doing when we practice this, because basically what I'm going to say about this is, one, it's all over there. We carried it on our backs for 5 months. And the other thing I'm going to say, well, I guess I haven't said the two things. First of all, you cannot do this trail. You cannot through hike without becoming a gear junkie, because at some point it really matters how much something weighs, and like a clip can make a difference. Like if the clip's in the wrong place, like I have like a water bottle holder on my pack that I hate, simply because the clip is in the wrong place and I can't hold it where I like it. So like these little design features become really big deals when you're on the trail. And then the second thing is, I think there's often a lot of pressure to like buy the newest or the latest thing, or like have the perfect thing. But you go through, as Mike talked about earlier, multiple different ecosystems, and the perfect thing changes. And the biggest thing that we did that I think we were really smart about was that we actually had my mom and a few other folks have our gear in different places. So when we needed something, we could have it shipped. So I swapped out my sleeping bag at some point because it wasn't getting as cold at night, and I really didn't want my super nice sleeping bag. I didn't mind having one I could trash. And so, just things like that make a really big difference. So I think the smartest thing we did was actually just stage everything we owned so that we could easily have it sent to us. And so we did buy a lot. I'm not saying that, but that was helpful. Flipping ahead here quickly. This as a slide we can come back to if people have questions about it. This is just a list of every single thing we carried on our backs. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Finally, resupply. So this is the big question: what you buy, where you buy it, what to send, where to send it. We made the call pretty early on just to stage stuff and have people send it as needed. A lot of people either have to or want to pack everything in advance, which makes things really stressful, because like, what do you do when you get really sick of couscous and your next box only has couscous in it, but just things like, so it was nice because we could have people send us stuff as we wanted. I do wish I'd done a teeny bit more research on this beforehand, because I feel like I just feel like there was a couple times when we made like just rookie errors, but I think you're going to make rookie errors about something. So this wasn't a bad one.
I just want to make a point about the quality of food at this point in time.
Uh-huh.
This was after they were already in Washington. So
Hence the beard.
but you can't really tell what all that is, but every single bit of that is candy. You went to a laundromat to do laundry, and they are dividing up all this candy, resupplying them. So it was wonderful discussing candy.
I will say one of the joys of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail is that you need sugar so bad that it isn't even unhealthy.
Yeah, so I did look at an article after we were done, is through hiking like a healthy habit? And they said, well, it's hard on your body, but it's really good cardio. We don't know if it's good or bad. The only definitive thing we know is it's bad for your teeth.
That tracks. Yeah. Oh, the final thing before we move on really quickly is, as you can tell in this is a really good example of what resupply looks like. You dump everything on a table, kind of like this, and then you somehow have to put it all into a tiny backpack and put it on your back. And the day after you get out of town, you're always the most miserable, because you think you wanted all this food and you buy it all, and then you realize you have to carry it. So anyway, that's that. So how did we get from here to here? You'll notice that we are not at the finishing terminal, which we'll talk about at some point. So I'm not even going to try to play this because videos aren't working great right now, but I'll leave it on just in case it decides to play on its own. It might. We'll see. Oh, no. Okay. We'll just skip ahead for a second. So
It's on our Instagram.
Yeah, it is on our Instagram. Yeah.
That.
It's just a typical day in a hike, and it shows sort of the topography and all of that. Basically on April 8th, we started hiking the Pacific Crest Trail from Campo, and we started at 20 miles and we just kind of kept going. A typical day for us looks like we got up about, this is sort of, once we got moving, it probably took 3 or 4 weeks to get up to about 20 miles. And after that, I'd say our normal days were 20 to 25. Once we got moving at about 20 to 25, I'm gonna scoot back to here just because I want this. We would wake up about 5 o'clock, pack up, usually get moving around 5:45 after we took care of just bio needs. Really lucky to be on, if you can get on a schedule, it makes your life a lot easier. Around 7:30 or 8, we would stop for breakfast. We wouldn't do that before we started. We were usually had already hiked about 5 miles at that point. And then sometime in between after that or around that, as we got water, we would get water. That also depended on the region we were in. Some places were really short on water and you'd have to carry water for 10 miles, and other places you could kind of just stop and get water as needed. I think our longest water carry was probably 15 or 20, honestly.
20,
Yeah.
I'd say.
And that means you have to have enough water to get yourself that 20 miles. So if you camp in that, you also have to have enough water for dinner and all of that. And then we'd usually stop around 12:30 for a longer lunch break, find some shade. We'd usually done about 13 to 15 miles, depending on the day. Followed by a shorter break around 3:30 or 4. And that was sort of when we decided whether we were going to stop at dinner or keep going after dinner. And then if we were going to stop at dinner, we usually stopped and camped at about 5:30 or 6, or we stopped at about 5:30 or 6 and had dinner. And that was usually about 20 miles, I'd say. And then sometime between 6:30 or 8, depending on the day, we'd set up camp. We'd read for as long as we could keep our eyes open. And then we'd usually be asleep by 9. While we were hiking, we'd sometimes talk. We were lucky because we had each other. Sometimes we hiked alone. Sometimes we listened to music. I listened to a lot of books. I listened to like 20 books on the trail this summer. Also, sometimes I didn't have anything in. It kind of depended on the day. You're on trail for a long time though. So the whole, like, just listen to the birds. It's a long time. It's a lot of birds. So books were great. They also got me up mountains. Like when I was going uphill, I always had something going.
So she really liked the epic music from Lord of the Rings when she was struggling up a hill, you know, the dun dun da da dun, you know, and she walks slow motion sometimes. So yeah.
So then kind of in between here and talking about our specific experiences of the trail, I didn't really know how to do this slide, but basically this is the like larger routines and just weird terminology you might hear us drop that have become so much a part of how we talk that we might not actually know how to stop, how to not say them. And also this is the why you shouldn't plan an overnight on the PCT during peak season, but please stop by the trail and bring treats. So basically other people. No, if you are hiking the PCT, go for it. If you're section hiking or doing a small section, as you saw on the previous screen, most of us are not getting into camp until 9 o'clock at night. Also, we're not going a quarter mile off the trail. We're finding these tent spots that are all on this app we have. And we're finding tent spots that you can see from the trail, and we are setting up, going to sleep, waking up and getting moving, which means when people are just like camping and chilling, I get why you're out there, but it's really hard as a hiker because we had friends who'd have to hike till 11 or 12 at night, who had to hike an extra 10 miles just because there weren't campsites available. And so it's like 3 weeks when the big kind of bubble, and actually that's a good term that isn't on here. We used to call kind of this, the majority of hikers usually start around the same time and they all kind of end up hiking in the same period of time. So it's called the bubble. And that's when the most hikers are going through a place. The bubble is usually 3 weeks to a month long. So that's just a good time to let those folks have the trail. Jump in.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked at how much different. I've always been a backpacker ever since I moved out west here, and how much different backpacking is from through hiking. Backpacking is very much about getting to a pretty place, having a campsite, watching the sunset, staying up around a campfire. Through hiking is you got miles to do, you get as far as you can, you sleep, you get up and you do it again. So it was a lot different. Yeah.
So then the top 2 things I have up here, we have 0 days and town stops. So about every I think we had 2 8-day carries being like, we stopped in town, got food, hiked until we went to the next town. So we had to carry enough food for 8 days. The majority of the time we were carrying enough food for about 5 days. So every 5 days or so we'd go into town. Some days we just went into town and went out again. Sometimes we'd stop and we'd take a day off. And when we took a day off, we had a 0 day, which meant we hiked 0 miles on the trail. If you went into town and went out and you hiked like 10 miles, you called it a Nero day. Nearly 0. And so we'd always have town stops. So these towns along the trail are very much set up for hikers. There's one in Washington where like all the old guys with pickups, they're all the retired folks, like just shuttle people from the trailhead into town all day long. And they have like, the general store has like a yard set out for the hikers, and they can like give you tokens for the like campground shower. It's like a whole thing. So often town stops are really ready along the trail often. And this is the bringing treats. You'll see trail angels, and we call trail angels of people who just stop on trail and provide things for free. It can be anything from sodas to darn tough socks. We ran into one crew that actually exchanged darn tough socks for us.
These socks from these people, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
it. It's kind of gross. and
Yeah.
funny.
I think we probably went through an entire round of socks. Like we exchanged every single pair of the socks we started with at least once. I exchanged one pair twice. So that's just a huge piece of the trail that's really wonderful, and it can really make your day. Yeah, I don't know. There was one place we stopped where someone had Halloween candy and fried cheese. Favorite weirdest trail magic. Someone brought us a whole roasted chicken in Southern California for like 10 people. So we all get out our little bowls and our sporks and are just like attacking this chicken.
Have you ever seen wolves eat an elk before? We worked in Yellowstone. That's what it reminded me of.
And then we were all like, where do we put the carcass? We don't want to bring the bones. So that's trail angels. And then the other thing is just on the trail, folks will often start traveling in trail families. It gets shortened to tramilies sometimes, which just sounds weird to me, but whatever. And we actually didn't really have a trail family. We kind of hiked on our own, but we did have a lot of friends that we interact with. And then also everyone gets trail names. We'll have a chance to hear ours in a little bit. So the desert, and I'm realizing we have this, these are kind of more scenic photos, so it's okay if we're blocking them, I think. We'll just deal with it. So yeah, there is a slideshow at the end. This is just like highlights of each section. So when you look at the PCT, even when you're through hiking, you're always breaking it down into sections. Like you cannot think about Canada when you're here. You won't make it. So our first goal was just to get it to Julian because there's free pie there. It was like day 3, free pie. Why not? And then as we gained confidence, we started looking ahead a little bit more, taking it by milepost by milepost. It took me probably until like a month before I left for the trail to realize that all those pictures you see of through hikers at like things like pine cones that say 3,000, 2,000 or whatever, they exist. You don't make them. Like they're just there. So you'll be hiking and all of a sudden they'll be like, oh, we just made it 600 miles. So that's, that was a really big deal. We were really lucky in the desert. It never really got too hot. It was nice and cool at night. We always had plenty of water. It's kind of a social time. You're getting to know people and you're getting to kind of figure out what your gear and your needs are. We made a lot of friends on that section, and actually everyone we were still in touch with and like would see when we got into town towards the end were all people we met in the desert. Because you sort of figure out who you're hiking at the same pace as, so you kind of know like, oh, this person goes about the same amount every day. That means we'll probably be within 24 hours of each other in 2,000 miles. Just still kind of blows my mind, but all right.
All right, after you get done with the desert, you get into the promised land, the High Sierra, which is one of the most picturesque areas on the trail and also one of the most challenging as well. So here's where it's the most remote section of the trail, when we had a couple 8-day carries with 8 days between any road locations. It is early. We were in there late May and early June. So even though it was a low snow year, there was still lots of snow on the passes, and there was a lot of dangerous situation. So we decided to team up with another couple we had met on day 2 and kind of go about it with them, which was really, really nice and for safety reasons. We did unfortunately witness someone lose their life on Forester Pass, which was a very, very difficult day. Yeah, but the trail community really came together and it was really kind of beautiful to see everybody support each other. So this is where you really start to get tired. You get really hungry, you get sick of snow, even if you're like me who really likes the snow. And this is where you really get into your hiking legs. You're going over a pass a day. Many times it's over 12,000 feet, and you're getting up to 20 miles a day, doing 5, 6, 7,000 feet of elevation in a day.
Move on to the next slide. I just want to, I put this on here because actually you can kind of see this here. That's a person. This is actually the snow traverse of the trail behind us. So that's just an example of like, that's what you're dealing with. That looked a lot steeper when you did it. Okay. So Northern California, going to keep this short because it was dark. It was hot and burnt, crispy. So we got lucky in terms of fire. Like we were trying to get further north as fast as we could, so we didn't get caught in fire. But we did have to go through some previous fires. So most of these pictures here were taken in the Dixie fire, which covers over 200 miles of trail. Contiguous 200 miles of trail. So you might have patches of green, but you are in burn area for 10 days these days. It is, oh yeah. And actually, again, I think the video will work. If the video works, you can see footsteps in a later slide here of what of what it actually looks like to be hiking through the ash. So also this is kind of when your body starts to break down a little bit. I had some really bad hip pain at some point. And the resupplies were weird because a lot of these towns were really hurt by this fire. And so by the fires. And so they're just haven't bounced back a lot. And so it was a weird time. It was tough. So, but then at the very end of it, you get to cross the border into Oregon and it gets really flat.
Yeah, so we got to Oregon and we fortunately had some friends in Medford, Oregon, and were able to recuperate and spend a few days in a nice air-conditioned house when it was 110 degrees outside, and then hit the trail again, and we're feeling pretty good, like we'd outrun the fires in California. We're like, we made it. Everyone knew, you all know there was a pretty good snow year in the Pacific Northwest, but we got to Crater Lake and the fires started. So here's a picture of the trail closure right here. But once again, we were very lucky as we were pretty close to Bend, and a lot of good friends live in Bend of ours. So our friend Chelsea came and picked us up, and we were able to spend a week in Bend, get our final resupplies ready for Washington. Our friend Kelly brought our dog down. We floated the Deschutes River, and we helped our friend Chelsea out with her school. So we were able to teach a little bit, and it ended up being really nice, actually. And we got back on trail just north of Mount Jefferson, hiked into Mount Hood on our wedding anniversary, and were able to spend our wedding anniversary at Timberline Lodge. Thank you, Nancy. So.
And then from there, we walked down to the lowest point on the PCT, crossed the Columbia River over the Bridge of the Gods, and entered Washington, which it's when I was making these slides, I realized, one, I did not take pictures of us in Washington. Like we were just so focused on what we were looking at because it is so beautiful. And two, it was just, there's a lot of highs and lows, literally and figuratively. Like this picture here, which was one of the smaller trees we climbed over on this day, was taken on the same day as this picture. I choose to remember it for this if I can, but it is what it is. So it was a very memorable time period. You're kind of like loopy and weird in Washington because you're so close to being done. And so, but kind of as we got north, we started to hear rumors of some lightning strikes. There isn't a lot of service, so you're sort of like really relying on friends at this point. So we walked into Stehekin and found out that the border had closed 30 mile, that the trail had closed 30 miles south of the border. So we hiked another 15 miles and got off on Highway 20. So this is our current final photo of the trail. We're actually, we're not going to get up here next year. We're going to go down and finish up the sections we missed in Oregon, but we will make it back to the end eventually. But yeah, so it was a tough way to end. I'd say it was honestly most tough because we didn't get to see a lot of the friends we'd made because everyone was getting off and it was just really confusing and complicated. And that section has no cell service. But it was definitely a tough adjustment. But it was still really a beautiful period.
Yeah, it was nice. It was kind of nice to end right here, even though there were fires. It was a beautiful day. It was not smoky. And Emma and I had both hiked that section of the trail before when we were in grad school. And here we are at Rainy Pass along Highway 20, where we met, or not right here, but along Highway 20 is where we met. So we accomplished our goal of walking home, which was nice.
This is another slide. I don't know how much time we actually have to do. This is another great. Awesome. We can come back to this slide after if anyone has questions. I guess the two key pieces here that we haven't talked about are that we hiked 150 days exactly. We would have finished in exactly 5 months, but then there was a fire. And we ended up getting trail names. Mike, so this is Aquaman. My name is Straps. We went by this for 5 months. And then, I can Straps and Aquaman. And we can get into the stories of that if people really want to hear them later.
Like Jason, whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly what. Yeah. So, and this is another slide we can come back to. So, re-entry. Actually, this is a good picture of one of the big things we did for ourselves when we got off the trail was that, first of all, I will say this is an ongoing process. I don't know that I've fully re-entered. This has been a good part. Actually making this presentation has really helped. But we actually trained for a half marathon and a marathon immediately post trail, which was a really good way. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Mike ran a marathon. I ran a half marathon. It was a really good way to physically come off that kind of serotonin dump that you're getting every single day, because the amount, the physical activity you're getting on the trail, your brain really has to rewire itself after the trail. And so training for a run was actually a really good way to sort of taper down. I feel like.
Yeah, it's interesting. You get into such a rhythm and flow, everything from day to day life. It's just eat, hike, sleep. It's the bare essentials. You really realize what you need to confront life and the frivolous things of society. So there's a lot of introspect you gain on the trail. So yeah, it was kind of the marathon, running that and just kind of easing back into society was pretty nice. And then I started work full time. Mason, how'd that go that first week for me? Yeah, Mason back there. Really, I gotta give a big shout out to Mason here, who I'm working full time at the school now. Without Mason, I probably would have ran screaming and jumped in the water and swam to Bellingham. So thank you, Mason. All right. So the future of the trail. We talked a lot about the history of it, our own experience here, but we also saw, this has been a dream of ours, collectively and personally for a very long time. And we got to live that dream, but we were also confronted with the harsh reality of what the future may hold for the trail here. So I think a lot of these trails and wilderness areas and national parks really started to appear because of westward expansion and the idea of manifest destiny. And then a lot of, timber extraction, resource extraction. So you had people like John Muir, who in 1901 wrote, thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to feel that going to the mountains is going home. And then our mountain parks are more than just, excuse me, I'm usually pretty good at this quote. Beginning to realize that going to the mountains is going home, that wildness is a necessity, and that our mountain parks are more than just reserves for timber and irrigation channels, but fountains of life. So when people like Muir, Thoreau, Rachel Carson, and Aldo Leopold really started to preach the necessity of wildness and the spiritual benefits, it created an outdoor boom. And we're really seeing that to this day. And the pandemic really drove people outside as well. So these places are getting loved to death. And even though we're not extracting resources from them, we're utilizing and using resources in a way that is not sustainable on these places. Not to mention climate change as well. We walked through so many burn areas. The deserts now are seeing more droughts. Northern California and Southern Oregon are seeing heat waves of extended for a month of 110 degrees each day, making it dangerous for hikers. So all of us on the trail had the same conversation over and over and over again, that we all wanted to do it now because we think in 10, 20 years that this might not be a reality anymore as a through hike. And we witnessed that this year, that it's becoming more of a section hike. So please, whatever you can do, get out there, do some trail magic, go visit the trail, experience it for yourselves, care about it, and really advocate for these things that make our wilderness areas special and our national scenic trails special. And that way people can enjoy these in the future, and more generations can continue to hopefully through hike in the future. So thank you all very much for coming. It was great to see you all.
Oh, I somehow this person. Okay. So we have a slideshow that may take a second to load, but that's fine. We can take questions while this plays. This is simply just a series of photos from our trail, from the, this is just all of the pictures. So you're going to get to see plenty of pictures once this loads. I don't know how, yeah, here we go. There we go. Perfect. And so we can just watch that while we take questions. Thank you.
September 8th.
Well,
Well, September 5th.
Yeah, we got off trail on September 5th. I know. It's okay.
Okay.
That's fine. It's okay. I had some really significant blisters in the very, very beginning, and ended up switching shoes. That's actually something I didn't talk about. I think I went through 3 different kinds of shoes to figure out what really worked for me.
I don't know, Scott, did we have trouble with our feet? we got a PT with Scott and Terry and Kim. We got a referral for that. So yeah, we had a little trouble with our feet. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
So you talk about hiking legs.
Mhm.
Can you
Oh.
describe what hiking legs feel like?
That's a great question.
Like iron.
It's basically your body kind of rewires itself, and you just have your, I don't know, how would you put that? Your, like your muscles in your legs can hold oxygen better and all of that stuff. So it's just, they don't get as tired as easily. So some of it's muscle development and some of it's just better circulation and all of that. It basically is like, that feeling when you get to the top of a hill and your legs kind of feel like jelly, or really when you get down to the bottom of a hill and your legs feel like jelly. At some point you just don't get that anymore. Like it just doesn't feel any different to be going up, down, or flat, which is great.
On this less snow year, did you swap out to have a light ice axe or just this hike?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Emma got an ice axe. And I had one at home and didn't didn't send it, so I didn't want to buy another one, so I went without. Okay, yeah.
Dan says, how many, did you see many hikers with children?
I'll let Emma answer this one. Yeah. So, yeah, we saw a couple of families, but Emma, I'm sure would love to answer this one.
So, oh, shoot. Sorry, I'm trying to show you guys, I'm trying to get this up so that you can see the, but I don't want audio. No, I can't. Yeah, this, but then this has. Oh, got it. There. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Technology, not as strong. So there's a family out there. Well, we did see a couple families on the trail. I'll say that. There is a family out there. They're about to do the Continental Divide Trail this summer. So there you get to watch them again. They had a 18-month-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old while on the trail. They started in March. We ended up getting ahead of them just before Kennedy Meadows South, right when we entered the Sierra. And I had the fortune of getting to watch them come into Kennedy Meadows South as a family. And they were like celebrities on the trail. Like we all wanted to know where they were, but I don't know how they did it. I really don't. They hiked, their kids hiked the whole trail. So yes, but not a lot. And the ones you do see are very well known because it's just like, everyone's like, yeah,
Follow this family.
yeah,
The woman did a fabulous job of putting pictures and telling little stories. And
Yeah.
it really felt like,
Yeah.
you get a sense of what they did and how they did it.
yeah. Their name is Daily, DALEY Walk. And yeah, they're hiking the CDT this summer, so you can follow them there.
So how much was on your 8K section?
We weighed our packs then.
We did.
That was I still am embarrassed by this. My pack was 38 pounds,
Yeah,
which is a lot.
that's a lot. Mine was, I think, 41 or 42, but I packed more food. As I ate more, so yeah.
We
30, I'd say.
yeah. So the recommendation, if you're going to be doing like long term, is that your pack should be 20% of your body weight. So we tried to never get it to be more than about 30 pounds. Obviously there are times when that happens. I usually felt like as long as it was lighter than 30 without water, it was okay because you drank your water. But I think our base weight being no food, no water, like things that you're going to use up while on trail. Our base weight when we started was around 12 to 15 pounds, which is a pretty good base weight. You're trying to get under 20 is kind of the goal. Really, really ultralight, like don't carry anything. People will be under 10, but we weren't going for that. Yes, Tar. You don't see those people. They're there, but you don't really see them. We were past, so actually that's a fun one. This past summer, 2 people set, they're called FKTs, fastest known times on the Pacific Crest Trail. One woman set fastest known time in Washington by going from the Canadian border down, and we did not cross paths with her because we were still in Oregon. And then the other one, and he posted his itinerary, and so I need to cross check it because I think we must have been in town when he passed us. But the other one was a man who did Campo, Mexico, all the way to the Canadian border, including this entire like 50-mile road walk in 52 days.
51 or 50.
51 or 52 days. Yeah, that's.
No.
This is specifically unsupported, which means he was not allowed to have support. He was actually trying to beat the supported time, and then this is a whole
If it
other
wasn't for
thing.
that road in
Yeah.
Oregon, that closure, he would.
He would have beat the supported time.
Do the math on that. More than 50 miles.
Yeah,
I think we
it's-
did about 53 a day.
If you're not averaging 50, you're, yeah. Those people are to through hikers what through hikers are to backpackers. Like even through hikers are just like, yeah.
Like we did the PCT, that'd be like, me going out now and doing Lopez Hill, so, yeah.
I love hiking in the rain, and that have that attitude always, that it's fine. How did you meet people that were not up for the rain or didn't do well in the rain?
We didn't really experience a lot of rain. By the time the trail closed, it was a dry summer. So I think we had maybe 2-3 days of rain. At the point when we were at Rainy Pass, our last day of rain was actually in Tahoe, just north of Tahoe. Yeah, yeah. But if you want to talk to us about a rainy backpacking trip, talk to us about our honeymoon. So, yeah. So I think we got something like 5 inches of rain in 24 hours. Might be exaggerating a bit, but yeah.
Only a little.
Peter?
I think from Council Paper.
Yeah.
What was your biggest surprise about this?
I can
Go for it. I
Yeah.
gotta think.
I think just honestly for me, having done the John Muir Trail, 10 years ago, it's my 10-year anniversary of the John Muir Trail. And just seeing how kind of hiking culture had boomed and changed a little bit. Amazing things. But I think what really struck me was some of the kind of almost the disrespect for some of the wilderness areas that I saw amongst there was a sense of entitlement in a lot, and that was kind of hard for me to handle.
Wait, by through hikers. Yeah. I won't. Yeah, I can. So, this
Fire closures.
fire close. Yeah. So I guess specifically, some of the behaviors that Mike's talking about that I think are really hard are things like on a smaller scale, just not packing out trash, not burying waste, disrespect in towns. A lot of times there's, we kind of talked about trail magic. It becomes almost a sense of entitlement. So when you walk in, you're like, oh, everything's so expensive. And it's like, well, these businesses have to, like, it's a business, it's a business. And then on a larger scale, things like, it's a term called poaching, but a lot of the trail gets closed every year because it's unsafe or the Forest Service needs to do maintenance or something happens. And there's people who are so married to the idea of having a continuous footpath and like not getting off trail for anything that they'll actually go through these closures illegally. And that was really prevalent this year. To a kind of horrifying extent, in my opinion. Just back to the question, I think the thing that surprised me the most actually was that I don't think I realized how strong I am. It seems weird to say that like out loud, but I think I questioned my purpose on trail a lot less than a lot of the people around me. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to do it and I hung in there and I just didn't really I just kind of believed in myself. And it kind of makes me like, I don't think it's something that I do all the time. And I don't think it's something that a lot of us do all the time is just put this much faith in ourselves. And because you're the only one that's going to get you to the end. I think at some point there's like this kind of like external pressure of like, well, like I told people I would do it and you want to do it for image, but you do not make it to Canada because you want to look good. You make it to Canada because there's something inside you that gets you there. And so finding that and kind of discovering that, I don't know, it took me by surprise.
Yeah, I've got one more thing to add to that too. And you're embarking on this 5-month journey with one person and you don't know how that's gonna go. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm like, gosh, we're gonna find out if this marriage is gonna last on this thing. And I say that kind of jokingly, but kind of honestly too. And it was really nice to like just be out here every day with her and to have the support and just we fight and argue in daily life, but and everything, but just on the trail, like it was so like bare essentials, and it was just kind of beautiful just to be out there with the person you love most, and really like just do it together and know that you are strong enough to make that. Like that was really special to me. Like I've always been kind of an individual person, and just I know I couldn't have done that by myself. So that was kind of like pretty fun for me to realize. So
Yeah. On a lighter note, but the same thing, I've sort of joked that the whole point of therapy is that you put yourself in a room and you can't get out of it. Like you can't leave. And when you're on the trail, you can't really leave. So it's like therapy, but you don't, the nature is your therapist.
Another question from the chat. This is Jane Marshall. She says, did you notice a difference in your hiking ability after going through the smoke from the fires? And then two more questions about safety. Did you ever feel unsafe? Were there predators?
Okay.
human or animal, like
I will say I never felt, the only time I felt unsafe from animals was when I was worried about mice. And then getting into my food. We did have to make some really strategic choices about bears in certain sections, but if like there's reports of problem bears. You don't camp in the areas where there's reports of problem bears. That's kind of like all you need to say about that. Like just be smart, know it's coming, manage it. In terms of safety with natural elements, I never felt I felt a little bit insecure on the snow. Intellectually, I knew I was safe, but it didn't feel safe. Those two things can be very different. And so that was hard for me, but you just kind of have to power through and do it. I don't know, safety wise.
Yeah, safety wise, I started to get a little nervous with the lightning strikes and the fires. We know quite a bit about fire behavior, and that week off in Bend, we were telling the Europeans who are not accustomed to seeing forest fires, don't go back out there in these conditions. There's eastern winds right now. I know you're probably not going to get struck by lightning, but fires can grow really, really fast out there. So I was glad we were off trail for that week. So yeah, that's what I was most concerned about as far as safety goes. As far as predators, sorry if this sounds condescending or anything, but Em and I lived in Yellowstone. I like a black bear. I'm like, okay, nice. Now get away, So not super concerned about predators when you're got grizzly bear tracks on top of human tracks, when you've been on backpacking trips before.
And just really quickly speaking to smoke, that actually speaks to a little bit. I breezed a little bit by it. We got really lucky. We very, very rarely had to hike in smoke, mostly because we were ahead of the fires. And then when the fires were ahead of us, we got off trail. And so we had a couple days when we were hiking in smoke. In Washington, there was one day when we were camping and we could actually see the fire on down the valley. It wasn't close enough to be dangerous, but that was a little eerie. I don't know that I noticed a difference in my hiking ability necessarily. It isn't comfortable, but we weren't out there for a week, thankfully. I think that would have actually made it harder to hike.
We did a lot more running in the smoke when we were training for the marathon. Honestly, when we got back, that's when it got really smoked.
Yeah. Mom and then wait. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's one really practical one. Were you ahead or behind the bubble?
Ahead.
And the other question is more. I feel like I have this kind of enduring faith that bending on the trail heal in ways that are psychological or physical or being that sort of natural that
I don't know that I've healed physically. I don't know about physical healing, but I'm teasing really. It's very hard on your body in its own way. You do get more fit, but only in really specific ways because you're moving your body in really specific ways. Mentally, yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of what I was speaking to earlier. I think that I don't know that it changed patterns for me in my daily life, but you definitely have to work through some stuff to be out there. And then, yeah, practically we were ahead of the bubble the majority of the time in Washington, especially because there was this festival thing. So a bunch of people doubled back. So we ended up way ahead, which was really great for camping. And there was a point in time when we were like, when my hip was hurting in Northern California, when we were really trying to keep going because we really didn't want to end up falling back into the bubble because it was just so crazy. So I'll let Mike finish that.
Yeah, on a kind of psychological level, I go back to, the John Muir Trail, the PCT, all the backpacking I've done. There's a reason I keep going back because I get what I need mentally, emotionally, spiritually from being out there. And there's just something about being out there day in and day out with only you and your thoughts and the people you care about most. And that's really, really special. And I will say, like, it's a lot nicer to come home to a place like Lopez than like Seattle, where, it's not as hectic. So that's been really nice. But yeah, I mean, one thing I also realize even all of this stuff right here, people say, "Ooh, that's, badass," or whatever. I'm like, you're handed everything. All of we still, can't do stuff without capitalism and mass production right here. And that's kind of a struggle that I had, honestly, with, yeah, I go out in the wilderness and I'm close to nature. No, I'm not. Like, I couldn't do all this without this stuff. So that was kind of a tough thing to reckon with. And stuff, I've been an environmental educator for almost 15 years now, and we preach wise resource use and everything like that. So there's always a part of me that feels a little hypocritical the more I go out there. And there's always this sense of privilege and entitlement out there too. So there's kind of the yin and yang of it all that I've been really seeing as I've grown older and spending more and more time out there. So thanks for that question. It's a really good one. Happy to share that. Yeah.
Food was a lot of it. Logistics often, like where you're gonna figuring out what's happening next. Mike spent 2 weeks in Northern California rewriting the words to Hotel California. You get bored. I mean, things like that's where that stuff comes in. And sometimes you're just talking about life. Kind of really depended on where we were. I think something that I felt that some of my friends who hike the trail also mentioned is that it also depended on what you were looking at. So for a lot of us, like going through the burn area, it was difficult logistically and physically. It was also incredibly weird mentally because it kind of like screwed with your brain. And so like I didn't even realize until after I got out and I'd been hiking for I remember Mike and I stopping once we were like in the green again, like a couple days later. And we were like it felt like we'd been in like this weird depressed like fugue or something. Like it was like coming out of something. So I think like where you were really impacted your mental state more than I think I even realized at the time. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like in the burn areas, like my mind was completely occupied by climate change. And then that was right when some Supreme Court decisions happened too, and we had heard about, and then like that kind of added on to everything. So it was just, yeah, so many things manifested depending on where you were. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. Yeah. Yep. Sorry, Nancy, I'll get you next. Yeah. Not many, honestly. Yeah.
Few.
Yeah. Yeah, there was definitely a few.
Good one. Yeah. Both, all of the above. We also carry physical maps. The Nat Geo has these, they're like sections by day. So we had one of these for each section. We really primarily used, it's called Far Out now. It used to be Gut Hooks. It's basically like social media for hikers, to the point that the comments are like Facebook comments. It's great. We'd like, there's some guy that would write like haikus of every place, like all of his updates were in haikus. And we met him at one point and I was like, how does it feel to be Far Out famous? And he was like, but basically hikers update waypoints. So if you know there's a water source coming up, or if there's a water cache with gallons, someone will update it and be like, hey, there was 60 gallons here at 12 p.m. on this date. And so if you have service and you update it, it allows you to sort of track where you're going and what you're doing. And so it really is sort of a real-time resource, which is both really incredible and also kind of terrifying that exists. But we also, Mike and I, because we don't totally trust that, also carried paper maps. We were one of the few people who did, but I'm really glad we have
It was kind of a luxury item. I'm
Yeah.
in school and I really like topographic maps. I
Yeah.
like, getting that mental image in my head by looking at, okay, there's this peak here, and actually,
Yeah.
like, rather than just a line on your screen, just being like, okay, that's Diablo Peak, that's so-and-so peak, which is kind of fun.
And in terms of like older people, it's interesting. And this gets kind of into, I don't really know the patterns actually. There was a lot of older folks in the beginning. And I feel like after the Sierras that sort of started to taper off. And we talked to a few people who just, their bodies were getting tired, like they were tired. And it takes a lot out of you, and 700 miles is a lot of miles. And also I think like people are out there for different reasons. And I think sometimes what you're out there for when you're retired, you sort of get that in the first 700 miles. And then you're sort of like ready to go home. You're out there for different reasons. And some people are out there to get to the border, and some people are out there to find themselves or figure something out. And once you figured it out, like it can be time to go home.
Nancy.
And then, okay.
Oh, I'm curious, because I know that.
Oh,
I'm just curious, like, say out of the percentage, like, what's a percentage of people that are the United States?
That's a great question.
Hikers were Germans. No one was in Germany.
In talking to people, that's 80% of,
Angela Merkel for a few
oh,
weeks.
shoot. Whoa, what just, okay. I guess my thing just ended. I'll just put it back up again. I was like, I don't think we need to watch that. I don't even know. Okay. So I'd say 80% of the people, like people from foreign countries, were German. Weirdly, I don't know why. I think it's easier for them to get visas, maybe. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, that's what our plans were. We hiked with
Visas, specifically visas to travel in the United States, because you're here for 6 months. So you need to have a visa. And so really specifically in 2021, 2022, whatever year it was, the US had done some weird thing with visas because they hadn't been giving them during COVID and blah, 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 blah. So there was a lot more Europeans than a typical year, I think. I'm not really sure because I've only done it 1 year. But typically for us, I would say about 50% or more of the people were from other countries. It was incredibly high, and a lot of them were German. I talked to people from more different countries this year in this, like on that, than I do in a normal year any other time, even living in Yellowstone. Like it was a lot of people. So yeah. Yeah.
I think we could probably do. Okay.
Two questions. One is from Lyra Dalton.
Mhm.
Who said, what was your funniest story from the trail? What made you laugh?
Can I tell
Yeah.
that? Okay.
I have to think about it.
This isn't probably, well, I don't know. This is one of the funniest stories. It may not be the funniest, but it is in our, I did think of it as our funniest town moment. Was actually it was really early on in the hike. We were coming off, we were coming out of Idlewild, which was like our first town stop, our first 0 day. And it was supposed to rain. So we got a hotel room with some friends of ours. And it was kind of like not really in a trail town. So like no one really knew what we were doing. And we're like walking around and all of our when I was in town, I'd wear my rainbow Crocs. So like I was like clearly like it was, I don't know what I was doing. But we like walk over and the only place to eat is the Sizzler. And so we walk in and we're like, Mike and I are like, I don't even know what this thing is. Like, and we walk in, it still has a salad bar. What place in the United States still has like those salad bars from when we were kids? Like, I don't know. And I was like, also, this is in the middle of like COVID. And I'm sitting there like, this is very strange. And so we walk in and we're talking to the guy behind us in line and we go to order and he just hands over his credit card. Like he's never heard of the PCT. He doesn't know what we're doing, but he thinks what we're doing is cool. So he paid for 4 people to eat dinner. And then we kept on, he wanted us to order more. Like we were like, oh, no, this is fine. We're like ordering the like biggest, most calorie dense things on the menu. And he wants us, he's like, well, do you sure you don't want the salad bar and some wine and this and this? And we're kind of like, no, really, we're good. So we got our dinner paid for at a Sizzler. And so like, and we talked to these friends for the rest of the trail. And at some point we had like, there was a while where we're like, oh, no, I don't go to Sizzler unless someone pays for it. So that was probably the funniest trail stop. Do you have another?
Yeah, it's not that appropriate though.
No.
Yeah.
I sat on an ant nest by accident. Mike thought it was funny.
Well, that's not even
Okay.
the one. No, I'll say real quick. So there were a lot of, once we got to Northern California, that we'd stop and people would be like, I'm doing this many miles today and this many miles. And like Scott, to kind of go back to what you asked, like it was like, why are you out here? Is it to do as many miles as you can? Like I want to be out here to like be in nature. And then Emma goes, well, yeah, it's kind of like all these guys are just doing a new, what measuring competition with their. So that was the funniest thing I heard on the trail, actually. So I laughed for days about that because it was a pretty good analogy. And we were both kind of like, come on, let's just be out and like enjoy the trail. Who cares about if you did 42 or 24? Like we're all going to the same place. So yeah.
Can you explain your trail names?
Oh,
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
no longer exists. I'm going to tell, can I tell these? Can I tell these? Okay, thanks. Mine no longer exists. I started off the trail. Sometimes people wear sun gloves. I thought they were stupid. So I ended up with a giant strap tan in the middle of my hands. And for some reason, it was worse than anyone else's. So I literally just had like a white line in the middle of my hands. And so somehow that became straps. I still think I should have been something about spices because I also carried about 2 pounds of like seasonings in my pack. But by the time it was too late to change it, by the time we got to that, you can change your trail name. However, Mike started with Farkle, which is the name of the dice game that we brought to play.
and then people started asking me if that was really gassy, and
It just didn't work. Yeah.
get rid of this name.
And then the other defining characteristic of Mike is that he was in really good shape when we started the trail. So if we'd get into camp and everyone else would be exhausted and Mike would just be like, all right. I mean, I don't know if he felt like that, but he seemed like that. He
Yeah,
was all bouncy. And so he would volunteer to get water for everyone. So he would go to like, he'd walk like a half a mile to this water source and get like 7 liters of water for everyone to cook dinner. So at some point I was like, Mike, I feel like your name needs to be this. So I'm like, you should be like Water Boy or like Aquaman. And so that's where Aquaman started. And then 2 days after he took the name, we met a Poseidon and he's like, why couldn't you have named me Poseidon?
and we met a Neptune as well. So, but it was kind of sweet, literally, when I decided to take the name Aquaman because we were in Agua Dulce, California. So we were Sweetwater, California. So it was kind of a nice place. And then for the next 15 miles, there was no water. So yes.
All right. Nice. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, last question. Yeah, no problem.
What do you get out of the whole experience? How you change the file?
Okay, that is such a big question. And actually, I don't think, oh shoot, I don't have, oh, it's all good. I'll paraphrase. I've been thinking about that a lot while I put this together. I think that's a question it took me a couple months to figure out the answer to. I think some of it goes back to what I said earlier. I do personally feel like confidence might be the wrong word. I feel like I feel like I gained a new ability to sort of like back myself a little bit. Like I know it's the like assurance that I know if I work hard, I will get there. And just knowing that for myself. Doesn't mean self-doubt doesn't creep in, but it just means like the self-doubt is more about like other things, not about my own capabilities. And then the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is it's the second, I listened to it on Trail. She talks about it a lot in the second Becky Chambers book of the Monk and Robot series. It's called, the first one's a Psalm for the Wild Built. The second one is a prayer for the crown shy. And there's a quote in there in the prayer for the crown shy where they talk about how too much comfort can sometimes, basically the idea that we put so much comfort into our own lives that we forget how comfortable the world can be and how nature can be. And the further away we go, the further we remove ourselves from being animals, the further we get towards forgetting that we are. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I really feel like the thing I've internalized the most is that I seek things that make my life simpler and more comfortable, but not more comfortable in a way that makes it more complicated. Like if it can give me comfort without taking away something, that's great. But if it's comfort at the expense of whatever, I'm just not motivated by that anymore. Like it just really isn't, it's just, I don't know. I just don't really need that. So I think for me, just like the process of like, this is all I needed for 5 months, like other things are great. I missed them when I was on Trail. I loved them when I got into town, but like, I don't need more than that to stay alive. The food's important, but like, so just recognizing that like what you really need is really, but then also, like there's things there where like there's design features in that make something worth it. So like it is worth investing in something if it makes your life better and it also makes it simpler. But it doesn't mean you need a ton of stuff. I don't know. Becky Chambers does a really good job of articulating it. I cannot as well. That one isn't on my Instagram. Yes. Yeah.
That's a great question to wrap up with too. Like all the stuff Emma was saying about just what we need and kind of what we take for granted in our day-to-day life. Things like water. I remember, still like to this day, like I turn on the tap and it's kind of amazing to me just how we have access to this life-giving thing so easily. And sometimes, I had to walk 2 miles to get 7 liters for everybody else, like Emma just said. It's just those things that we take for granted. Also just personally, I think, I've always identified as a hiker, naturalist, and environmentalist, and it was kind of throwing my ego out. Like it always had to be something I did be my, who I was to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And I did it. And now that I've done that, like, I'm really glad the journey was it. I don't want to be, the guy who hiked the PCT. I didn't want it to be part of my identity, really. Like, it was a journey I shared with my wife and best friend. And now I just want to, like, kind of get on with life. It wasn't, I did this amazing thing. It was like, I had this incredible journey and I had a great time doing it. And I don't need to be identified by that as an accomplishment or anything like that. So I think really like looking at why I'm doing stuff, is it for egotistical reasons or is it personal growth reasons. And I can say that the PCT was a lot of personal growth for me as a person, as an individual, as a community member, and as a husband as well. So yeah.
Thanks. Speaking of water, I was just trying to look for, we realized this is how ingrained water gets into you. When we unpacked all of this to put out here, we realized that I hadn't thrown out the water from one of my water bottles because you don't throw water out. So anyway, well, thank you all for coming. I have to run.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have to run, but I'm also doing the EMT class and they let me out for like an hour.
So yeah, I can hang around if anyone wants to just personally chat. I'd be happy to hang out, even though I'm about an hour and a half past my bedtime. So I'll make an exception tonight. I'm still on trail time. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Good to see you. Yeah. Great job, Mike. Thank you.